And welcome into your local election headquarters on KRK.com and Fox16.com. I'm Mitch McCoy. You know, we've been talking with all of these different candidates right here online, and I want to get to our next candidate here. Tell us your name and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Sheridan Richards. I'm running for position 10. I have over 20 years of experience in the corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors. I'm currently a senior human resources leader at a local healthcare provider. I've been married for 11 years to a Southern gentleman, and I have 2 children who attend our public schools here in Little Rock. I'm a regular person looking to serve my city by bringing a fresh perspective. Thank you for having me.
Some Southern hospitality, right? Let's get straight to some of these questions. We have a lot to unpack here. Crime in Little Rock has been an issue for years. What is your opinion on the relationship between the Little Rock Police Department and the community? What ideas do you have to improve community policing, and how should the crime rate be addressed?
Yes. So if we look at the relationship between the police department and the community, I would say it's tense between the department and the Black community. Those who are aware of that tension would say that the relationship needs repair. But those who are not aware of it or maybe dismissive of it would say that that relationship is great. My philosophy is if any part of our community is hurting, then we're all hurting. And so in order to have a true healthy relationship between our community and the Little Rock Police Department, we need to reform how it interacts with the Black community as well as other minorities. With regard to improving community policing, I think we need to start with training. We need courses on implicit bias, cultural humility, and cultural sensitivity. We also need to make sure our officers are committed to a duty to preserve life whenever possible. We also need a zero tolerance policy for the use of excessive force so that we can weed out the bad apples from the good apples. My career started in law enforcement, and so I know what good officers look like, but those who are not good officers need to be held accountable. And then if you were to ask me how we need to address crime, I would say that crime is a symptom of a bigger issue in our community. We need to deal with the root causes. And so for me, that is food insecurity, that is homelessness, that is inequitable access to healthcare, to education. People need jobs. If these basic needs are met, then crime will naturally decrease. For example, if we provide food, if we provide housing, if we make sure people feel safe, then crime will not be an issue. And so for me, it's not just starting with crime or starting, with increasing our police officers on the streets. It's really dealing with the root cause.
You know, there is an apparent discord within the Little Rock Police Department. The police chief is facing multiple lawsuits from current and former city employees. The police chief, in his individual capacity, is suing Little Rock employees over civil rights violations. How do you plan on addressing these apparent issues inside the city's police department?
Yes. So first, I would start off by saying it is their right to sue. As citizens, that's their right. We need to let them exercise that right. We need to allow the courts to decide those cases. I believe that the training I mentioned earlier with regard to cultural humility, sensitivity, implicit bias can help with this. I would also add that conflict mediation would be helpful so that these conflicts could be resolved in the future without it reaching the point of litigation. As a candidate for city director, I'm not involved with the day-to-day management of personnel, but in the city director capacity, I would provide strategic advice to our mayor, who functions as the CEO of our city.
So let's move away from the police department. Let's talk about just the government infrastructure. The board's at-large positions have always been a hot topic. Do you believe the board should be restructured?
So I believe this issue needs to be put before the voters, and I would be supportive of whatever the popular vote is. If the board is restructured, I would like to see it done in a way that increases representation. And so I'm completely open to that happening, but I think the voters need to be the ones who decide.
So some board members have been vocal in recent months about a disconnect or an apparent disconnect between the mayor's office and some members of the board. How do you plan on working with the executive office but still hold executive leadership accountable?
Yes, good question. So my background is human resources. I have over 15 years in the field, and everything I do has to be done with partnerships. My skill is in building partnerships. And so with my pursuit of this board seat, I'm coming in with the assumption that I'll be able to establish strong partnerships that work toward collaborative solutions. And that's with the mayor, with the city manager, with board members, and other city and community leaders. My philosophy is I am your partner until you force me to hold you accountable. And so I'm coming in first with a partnership mentality, and then I'll have to decide whether or not accountability is required from me.
Well, some would say, and okay, moving from government infrastructure, let's talk about neighborhoods. Some would say that the city has taken a significant effort to revitalize neighborhoods. Others would completely disagree. What's your opinion? What would you do to further those efforts?
Yeah, I think we're on the right track, but there's so much work to be done. I would propose a full review of our zoning and planning laws. Right now, in some neighborhoods, it's cheaper to build new homes than it is to renovate existing ones. And that's a problem when you look at all the vacant properties in our city. We need to make it easier for small businesses to open up here so that we can continue the economic growth and vitality of our city. We need to incentivize businesses to open south of 630 so our residents can also benefit from that growth.
Well, okay, and you opened the door on 630. That's my next question. Let's just be honest. Some people have voiced concerns about this racial divide, specifically using Interstate 630 as a reference point between poor neighborhoods, middle-class neighborhoods, and upper-class neighborhoods. What part will you have to help unite this city?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I'm a human resources professional, and partnerships is where everything begins. And so for me, it all starts with leadership and partnerships. I want to lead that effort to bring people together and hopefully be the bridge that unites our city. This has to be modeled from our city government leaders. And so first, that bridge has to be built in the boardroom so that we are a united front. And then hopefully that will trickle down to our city residents. I also think of two important mediums that have historically brought people together, and those are arts and sports. With arts, people from all walks of life can come together. We can jam to the same kind of music. We can dance to the same kind of music, enjoy visual arts and poetry. And so I'm curious how we could use the arts to unify our city. And then when I think of sports, people from all walks of life can come together and cheer for the same team. We need to leverage the existing sporting programs that we have and use those to build our city together. Perhaps even starting a league of teams that represent residents from all over the city where we come together and play. And so when I think of arts and I think of sports, those are creative avenues to bring people together in the spirit of unity.
So if elected, what would you do to help improve the quality of life for every citizen?
Yes, so that's actually captured in my vision for Little Rock, which is a fresh start. And fresh is an acronym that stands for family, reading, equity, skill development, and housing. With the family pillar, I want to build a city that is more inclusive across racial and socioeconomic lines. With the reading pillar, I chose that because 60% of our third graders are not reading at grade level. And if your audience has done any research about that third grade statistic, that tells you the likelihood of whether or not a child will end up in poverty, end up in jail, or end up on the right or wrong path of life. We need to form a partnership with our soon to be elected school board to make sure our children have everything they need to be successful. The E in fresh stands for equity, and that is because no one should have to travel across town to go to a grocery store. Everyone should have access to public transportation, to healthcare, and to other city resources. The S in fresh stands for skill development. I am concerned that as our city is poised for growth over the next 2 to 5 years, that we are not ready to step into the jobs that are coming here. I toured the Port Authority recently and learned we're already having trouble filling jobs. And so if you think about the growth that we're we're preparing to happen, we need to make sure our residents are ready to step into these jobs. And so that will require reskilling and upskilling our workforce so that we're not recruiting outside the city of Little Rock. The talent already lives here. It just needs an opportunity. And then the H in fresh stands for housing. And that's because we need affordable pathways to home ownership so we can get through this pandemic together. We need to think of our renters and our landlords, making sure no one is left holding the bag. We need to be more aggressive with pursuing CARES funding so we can cover or help our residents not carry this burden by themselves. Though all of these pillars in Fresh are important to me, the family piece, the reading piece, the equity, skill development, and housing piece, I would say housing is the most urgent because of the pandemic that we're in. So all of that collectively represents what I stand for. And if you didn't notice, at the center of the Fresh acronym is equity. And that's because everything we do, if we're proposing resolutions, if we're proposing city ordinances, if we're recommending solutions or voting on anything, we have to start with equity so we can make sure that no one is getting the short end of the stick.
Well, you started talking a little bit about COVID-19, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that, especially with the economy. If elected, your term would consist of rebuilding the city's economy after the COVID-19 global health pandemic. Many businesses have been forced to close. What kind of experience do you have to ensure Little Rock not only bounces back, but grows to a new height?
Yes, so I would say first we need to control this virus, making sure that we continue to frame it as a public health matter and not an economic matter. What good is it if our economy does well, but people continue to die? You cannot put a dollar value on a human life. And so I think we need to continue to mandate masking, social distancing, and limiting gatherings so we can stop the spread of this virus. I served as a business manager back in 2008 when we had the recession that was caused by the housing bubble. And my focus at that time was reducing expenses and focusing on maintaining the essential business functions. That's a similar approach that we need here. And so I would look at making sure that we are focused on the areas of our city that need to truly keep the city moving forward, and then pull back on the areas that can help us stop the spread of this virus.
Very good points. Let's talk a little bit about just finances in general. In recent years, you might recall the city announced a financial struggle, which caused layoffs and park closures. If elected, how will you ensure the city avoids future layoffs and other closures?
Yes, so I'll remind you, we are in a pandemic, and so I still think we need to make sure we're controlling the spread of this virus, because if this virus is still attacking us, it's going to continue to hurt us operationally. So we've got to control that. As a city director, I would propose looking at a zero-based budgeting strategy where we have all of our city leaders justify the dollars that they're asking for from year to year, so we can make sure we're spending our dollars efficiently and that we're stretching them as far as they can go. We also need to make sure that the nonprofits that we partner with are producing measurable outcomes, because what gets measured gets done. This is another way we can increase our efficiency. So when I look at our financial struggles, though, we have to be mindful that there are people looking for jobs. We can't be as dependent on taxes, for example, because people may have trouble paying them right now. We need to look at spending and reduce the spending wherever we can.
Thank you so much for your time today. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Just a reminder, Election Day is November 3rd. KRK4 and Fox 16, we are your local election headquarters leading up to the election and, of course, on the big day. Take care.